Hello everyone, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I'm Kai Yang from the Sydney Institute for Astronomy at the University of Sydney. I'm very glad to give this talk on the field eruption caused by interacting multi-current system in the solar corona. This work is collaborated with Professor Michael Witterland and Professor Bundasau. First, let's show the observations from the AIA EUV images in 7 channels. It's very clear to see that at the initial stage, some brightenings occurred at the foot point of the flux rope structures. Then the rope experienced a sudden rise and then stopped. Finally, some materials showed a twist motion around the stop rope. From these observations, it seems to be a single flux rope, which is not right. It will be shown in the following slide. This small flare occurred near the solar disk center. Fortunately, the Big Bear Solar Observatory observed this activation during this small flare. Actually, not the whole activation was observed, but a subset of it, which is emerged 2 days ago and gives a strong flow during this flare. The TIO images clearly shows the sunspot motion. If we zoom in this image, we can find the rotating of a low-lived spot and the strong shear flow between the top and the middle spot. This shear flow built the energy of the active region and drive the small flare. We choose to use the data-driven simulation to model this field eruption. Here, we show the initial conditions in our simulation. The initial atmosphere parameters is an isothermal stratified atmosphere, and the initial velocity is artificially set at 0. The most important one, the magnetic field, is assumed by using the nonlinear force-free field model. As we know, several popular methods have been widely used to reconstruct the nonlinear force-free field. We test them with 3 different methods, including the MHD relaxation method, optimization method, and the Grad-Rubin method. Finally, we obtained a similar result that suggests the nonlinear force-free solutions we obtained here is acceptable in our case. A comparison between the 3 methods and the AIA 94 images before the flare is shown in the right side movie. In this movie, the red-yellow cloud indicates the magnitude of an electric current, and the green-blue lines indicate the quasi-separatrix layers that separate the different flux ropes. It's clear that the twisted structures in this region contains 3 main flux rope structures rather than a single one, and they tangled with each other. We invert the vector magnetogram from the Stokes 4-component profile from the data measured by the NARIS at BBSO using the Milan-Eddington model. This image shows a comparison of the result from HMI and NARIS data in the same region at a very close time. Of course, the NARIS results will show much more detailed structures than that of the HMI data. The resolution of the NARIS data is about 70 kilometers per pixel. We inverted all the data for the NARIS and embedded them into the HMI data in a much larger region that could cover the entire active region. Then the photospheric plasma plasma flow is estimated by using the David-VM technique. The magnetograms and the velocity field of the photosphere could provide the bottom boundary conditions for the simulation. They are filled into the outer ghost layers. Then we used open source simulation code MPI AMRWalk 2.0 to solve the full MHD equations with gravity and optical thin radiative cooling and thermal conductions. Here, we give a brief result from the flare simulation and compared with the EUV observations. From the simulation, only the top part of the twisted structures shows a sudden rise, and the lower one seems to be very stable. This structure seems correspond to the stable structure in AA304 channel, indicated by the blue area. It's difficult to notice this one. If we check the magnetic topology features in the simulation, it will give much more details of the evolving flux rope. Here, we show the evolution of the quasi-separatrix layers on the sides of the flux rope's cross-section. It's very easy to find out the flux rope structure, and I point out them by the right arrows. The lower one indicates the stable one shown in the last slide, and the upper one indicates the rising one. Before the time 31 minutes, the two ropes do not change too much. The upper one seems only shows a little expansion. After this time, the upper one experiences a heavy expansion and a sudden rise, but do not reach a very high position before it stopped. The stable one keeps the initial height, but the closed quasi-separator layer structures disappeared, which means it was mixed with the emitted field. Compare the observations and the simulations. We can find several corresponding features from them. For example, the twisted and the fiber-like structures in the top images from the Big Bear Solar Observatory high-resolution H-alpha observations. From the magnetic topology theory, the quasi-separatrix layers at the bottom could correspond to the observed flare ribbons. In this case, we also found it in the high-resolution H-alpha observations. If we zoom in on the H-alpha images, we can find the corresponding ribbons. They all indicate the boundaries of the twisted structures, especially the spiral one, which is a typical Hawk structure of the flux rope footpoint, and in H-alpha image, the spiral is nearly more than one turn. This is very rare to be observed, and such a beautiful Hawk is also very rare to observe. We also found several ball patch structures that correspond to the H-alpha brightening, and the separatrix layers from this ball patch plays the role of the multiple flux ropes boundaries. For example, the H-alpha images on the right side, brightening number 1, this one directly comes from the magnetic reconnection at the ball patch. In this simulation, we do not use artificial resistivity, so the magnetic reconnection comes from the numerical diffusion. If we zoom in on this structure, it just looks like a 3D non-point structure at the bottom, but after careful calculation, we do not find any null point in this region. It's only a ball patch. Then we continue to zoom in. The arrow here indicates the velocity field, and the color is the magnitude of the electric current. At this snapshot, the plasma velocity is squishing this non-point-like ball patch structure, and the reconnection at here is the initial trigger for the entire flare. The H-alpha brightening number 2 comes from the reconnection of the ball patch below a twisted structure. We zoom in this image. The color and arrow share the same meaning as that in the last slide. A current sheet had formed here, and the plasma velocity showed that the conversion motion into the current sheet. But the reconnection here is not fully developed in this snapshot. The brightening number 3 comes from the ball patch here, whose separatrix layers separate the rising and the stable flux loop. It seems to fill the full active region because this 2 lobe is relatively larger than the third one. Zoom in this image. A conversion flow observed again at the bottom. This flow had benefited from the NARI's high-resolution magnetogram because it resolved a detailed conversion flux element, which is very fuzzy from the HMI data. Therefore, the more we could obtain, the more we can simulate. Here we show the final stage in the simulation. It gives a highly mixed and twisted structures in this active region. From the live images, the color indicates the magnitude of the electric current. It's clear that the final stage still contains multiple flux loops. The right images shows the same structures, but with different meaning of the color. The color indicates the alpha value along each field line. The alpha is the normalized parallel electric current along the magnetic field, as the formula shown in this slide. The integral of this alpha along the magnetic field lines will give the twist number of this line. Therefore, the value of the alpha can be regarded as a local index for the hardness. The different hardness magnetic fields are mixed together by this field eruption. Here, we give a brief summary of our current research. We have combined the HMI and NARI's vector magnetogram to drive MHD simulation. The research seems to consist with the observations well. From the simulation and the initial nonlinear force field, we found that the multiple flux loops tangled with each other and they interact with each other during the small flare. Several ball patch structures have been found in the simulation that corresponds to the brightening point observed in H-alpha images. The final stage contains the multiple flux loops as well, and they also can tangle with each other. This final structure provides the potential source for the flares in a later time of this activation, and indeed, those flares happened. As they happened far from the solid disk center and the lack of high-resolution magnetograms, we do not do any simulation about them.